Jurassic World Rebirth came out pretty recently, and already the spark of power scaling discussion goes throughout the dinosaurs of this film. Not only with things like the Rex, Titanosaurus, and the Spinosaurus, but the biggest threat of the movie, obviously, the mutant Tyrannosaurus Rex, the D-Rex, and how he would stack up to the other megatheropods of the verse, or the Big Four. And since usually I want to wait until at least the movie's out, like digital, but I'm not really given much of a choice, just due to how much of the talk of his scaling has actually been brought up. So, where does he scale? How does he compare to the other dinosaurs? What statements does he have? What feats does he have? With such little screen time, if so many people think he's so strong, then he clearly must have done something extremely impressive, or have been stated to be doing something so impressive. So let's dive right into it. Does the T-Rex actually have such impressive feats to where he's an extremely strong dinosaur? Or is this simply made up lies created by the community for no real reason or for invalid reasons? Let's get into this, and let's go into 4 specific categories: his size, the feats he performs on screen, the statements from either promo material or official or other official statements, and lore, and how he stacks up to other megatheropods, aka the Big Four and such. So let's go on to size, probably his best factor, which everyone can agree. He is a pretty big boy, standing at 26 feet tall, 47 feet long, and 9 to 10 tons. Quite heavy. And going by size, stretch, and start and the other stats that we know, he is a good couple feet taller than any of the other Big Four, with the tallest being the indominus giga being either 20 to 22 feet tall. And obviously Rexy and Spino are just a little shorter than this. So D-Rex at the bare minimum is 4 whole feet taller than these guys. And at a maximum, he's 6 feet taller, actually. However, for length, he is actually shorter in length than things like the giganatosarus and indominus rex, who have statements of having 50 to 55 feet in length, while other dinosaurs such as Rexy and Spino only have things for 40 feet in length or maybe lower, meaning while the D-Rex is longer than Rexy and Spinosaurus, a good whole 7 feet, Indominus and Giga have the potential to be at from 3 feet longer to 7 feet longer than the D-Rex. And 9 to 10 tons is actually quite similar to these dinos. Pretty much all of them range from 9 to 10 tons, the Spinosaurus probably being the lightest out of these guys, and Rexy being 9 tons consistently, Giga and Indom being 10 tons as well, maybe a little bit heavier. But, so while the D-Rex is a lot taller, the Indom, Giga, Rexy, and Spino are similar-ish, if not in the same weight class to the D-Rex, and either the same length, if not longer, depending on the dinosaur. So while the Distortus Rex is definitely a much bigger opponent than these guys, it might not be to the extent that some people think, especially with this overhyped fake size chart going around, which is actually admitted by the creator of the size chart that it's just wrong compared to other more valid size charts if you want to go by that logic, which obviously official sizes are better than using a fan-made size chart. But people have just been throwing around this image left, right, and center, so I think it would be kind of hard not to bring it up, especially when talking about size, since I'm inevitably just going to get a comment in this video just showing the size chart and telling me I'm wrong when it's bad. But with size out of the way, and the D-Rex's biggest factor, let's go into the feats it performs on screen, which it has very few of, as it doesn't really fight any dinosaurs for the matter to upscale it off of. It's not like Indominus or Giga, who fights off Rexy, so therefore we can conclude they upscale off of anything Rexy does. However, he does have some impressive showings. He's able to casually stop jeeps in their tracks and uproot trees by just kind of walking. Casual wall level feats just by moving its body. Keep in mind, it's not even really attacking when doing this, it's just moving its body up and down or forward. It's not specifically trying to use any aggressive force or anything, it's just moving. by simply moving its body, its wall level, which is consistent with its GPE, or the amount of force it would create, combining the speed it moves at plus its size. But by its best feat by far is destroying and throwing the helicopter shown in the film. Well, although his bite doesn't fully crush the thing, he pretty easily destroys it and throws the damn thing like a rag doll. Consistently a small building level feat. It does this pretty casually as well, not to a quantifiable degree, so we can't really say it's a building level threat, especially when the calc isn't that high in a small building. If it is like decently high in a small building, or like small building plus, then I could definitely see an argument being made that the Rex's full attack power, if it knows how to utilize it as such, considering we never see it fight, could be in those building level ranges of power. But even at small building, this does get above 90% of the verse, excluding things like the megatheropods and Moza. If we're going to compare how much energy they create by destroying or ragdolling things, the Indominus Rex has pretty consistent building level calculations, not only with things like Anki's tail, but also with the aviary smashing, as the glass is a specific type of glass which gets it to the degree it's at. With therefore Rexy and Giga scaling off of that, as Rexy can fight and harm the Indominus, and the giganatosarus fights a version of Rexy that can also harm the Indominus. And obviously Moza being the consistent strongest thing in the first upscaling, potentially having a higher feat with him absolutely ragdolling and demolishing the submarine in Fallen Kingdom. If you want to argue Spino in here as well, off of the fact that Spino, Big, and therefore Big Edie and maybe even Tarbo could downscale off of it, as Spino has statements of scaling to a version of Rexy in the past, and Big Edie is superior to the Spinosaurs visually and stated, and Tarbo can somewhat fight a Camp Cretaceous Rexy, though Tarbo does lose in the end. Meaning when it comes to the actual calculable feats and how much energy we visually see them produce on screen, then the Big Four would take that, as well as the Moza, and maybe some other things like Big Edie and the Tarbosaurus. But what about statements? It does have some of those. It said it to be the strongest thing on an island and its unstoppable force on it, though it is pretty much specified as referring to the island, so it isn't a general statement amongst all the dinosaurs, unlike some other statements like Rexy being the most powerful predator in history, or the Giganatosaurus being an unstoppable force. It is specifically stated to be referring to the Rebirth Island, meaning it would simply be the strongest on the Rebirth Island, which most of the island isn't really anything notable when it comes to feats, except for maybe the Titanosaurus based on its pure size, if it could take it down, though you can cast some doubt on these statements, as a more official statement does conclude the fact that in the original script, the Rex in the film Ember, as officially named, would have beat the D-Rex in its encounter, though you can also make the argument that this wasn't in the final film. However, you can also just say it wasn't in the final film, not because it was implausible, or it wasn't because it was illogical and there was like a weaker version of the D-Rex in the original script. It's just because I didn't want the film to go in the direction of a final fight. So you can still argue that the narrative intent is the Rex is superior to the D-Rex when it comes to combat. But let's say the D-Rex does scale above Ember, as Ember is its own kind of topic I think we should cover if we're talking about the scaling presented in Rebirth, and what we know about Ember. Ember is a Rex who is stated to be bigger than any Rex in the franchise, including Rexy to an unquantifiable degree, so somewhere beyond 20 feet tall, 40 feet long, and 9 tons. And its scaling relies on pretty much these same statements. It's said to be bigger, muscular, and stronger than any Rex in the franchise, putting it above Rexy and Big Edie most prominently, and therefore the Spinosaurus as well. However, I do have some problems with these statements. These are promotional statements and they are iffy, and the only one you say you can't call a promo statement is the official Gareth Edwards statements, which only says bigger and more muscular, which at best you can interpret that Ember is a bigger creature who is physically stronger, but this doesn't necessarily mean that Ember has better attack potency or durability or speed or whatsoever. And if you want to take in the fact Ember can't break through a raft or through rocks and that's all it does in the film, then if anything, the movie is kind of casting doubt on these iffy promotional statements, if anything. And him scaling to the D-Rex even is questionable in the first place. Their scaling to each other is questionable in itself. So it's even a debate in itself if the D-Rex even scales to Ember, or if Ember even scales to the D-Rex. They quite literally never encounter and both have statements on the other, with varying degrees of validity. So even if you want to say Ember is more powerful than Rexy, which objectively she is not, and even if Ember was more powerful than Rexy, you can just argue the fact that that's the only stat she would take, aka she's stronger, and then Rexy would take literally every other stat that isn't strength and size, considering Ember has done nothing. A similar statement is said about the Rebirth Spinosaurus and the JP3 Spinosaurus, though this is even worse since the statement tries to argue that the Rebirth Spinosaurus, the more the more in real life accurate, smaller Spinosaurus that kind of kept to water, is like an evolved version of the JP3 Spino and is directly has a better build than him, which no, the JP3 Spino or CCC Spino quite literally just dwarfs it in size and build and all that stuff, just visually. So I think this statement is more so a detriment in itself when it's just trying to argue something that's evidently not true if we use our eyes. I don't think any sane person is going to tell you that the Rebirth Spinosaurus's build is a more evolved, stronger, more physically muscular build than the JP3 or CC Spinosaurus, when the Spinosaurus is dwarfing that thing in size. And the Rebirth Spino quite literally does nothing throughout the film. It doesn't even have any anti-feats, it just eats people and leaves. So, with all of this out of the way, how does the D-Rex end up stacking up on its predecessors? Since the dinos have no inverse on each other, it's hard to compare them in that way like we normally would when talking about, for example, Rexy versus Spino, or Indom versus Giga, or whatever stick. Like how, once again, we use a Rexy as a measuring stick to compare the Indominus and the giganatosarus. There is no measuring stick for these dinosaurs, for another dinosaur we can use. It's just the D-Rex's own feats and own statements, which, as I mentioned before, the Indominus does have higher showings. Therefore, Rexy, Giga, Moza, and maybe even some other creatures would be stronger, more durable, and have better attack potency than the D-Rex. But I know some people will argue that size is an automatic win con when it comes to these creatures, which, honestly, not only is it not that impressive of a size gap, being bigger than your opponent has never meant that you are stronger in fiction. Several examples in fiction, from Godzilla and Ghidorah to all the times in fiction where you're a small grunt taking down a big kaiju. But even in Jurassic World, Blue was fighting and arguably pretty much beating up the larger Scorpius Rex, and Little Edie was beating up and is stated above the larger Spinosaurus. Even though Big Edie and Blue are both smaller than their opponents, they still show superiority to them. I've also seen people question how they would even take it down due to its size. I think it would just be in a more logistic sense of the manner. I think it's just as simple as in any of these guys just going for its legs to make it flip over and going for the most likely weaker underbelly. And once again, it's not like there's a big size gap anyways, and especially with the obvious speed advantage as well. The D-Rex doesn't really look like it's going in its favor for this. Though, not to downplay this big fella, he's obviously one of the strongest things in the verse alone. He's an apex. There's not much in the league that can do a small building feat casually in the verse. There is some characters who can, like the Big Four and Moza. So, I think in totality, while the Drex is definitely a apex for sure, he's in that same league of power, like general league of power, maybe not the same specific tier, or maybe not even like relative to these guys, like the Big Four, but he's in the ballpark of where they would stand. And he should generally be considered above mostly everything else that isn't a mega theropod or something. So, in conclusion, while the Drex is strong in his own right, he doesn't necessarily compare to some other creatures shown throughout this film franchise. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share this video. And please join the Discord server in the links below. I post constant polls of the days. I upload my videos first there, so on and so forth. Peace.